So, Dan, I want you to respond first, if you will. Really, it's just this is a discussion, right? What are we moving in the right direction as premium publishers? Is this the right kind of thing to think about? Where does it lead? What should we do?
Off we go.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm aware it's the end of probably quite a long day. You've talked a bit about the market and the context, and I think it is super challenging. I mean, if I speak of what I do, I probably spend half of my time talking either to clients or new business prospects about what their challenges are over the next 1, 2, 3 years or so. I think anyone who's thinking further than that is definitely in crystal ball territory at the moment. It's pretty uncertain out there. And I spend the other half of my time thinking about us as an agency and what do we have to do? What capabilities do we need? What tools and systems do we need in the future in order to help our clients solve some of those challenges? And clearly, as part of all of that, I am dealing with the supply side. And I think your point about an imbalance in that is really well made. And I think it's in a number of different ways. You can talk about where investment is going, and 80% of digital investment is going into two-player sort of thing, which is obviously concerning because it means that a lot of weight is in one place. But I think the thing for me that's almost more concerning is sort of the share of attention. Those 3 players that you put up on the screen earlier, they're in my agency every day, all of them, talking and influencing 250 planners. And if I can be honest, they're in my agency and in my planners' faces a lot more than other logos up here on the wall. And as neutral as you want to be, you are getting a lot of that at you, and they're very well funded, and they do brilliant stuff. Don't get me wrong. I met one of them earlier on today, and we talked about some really exciting stuff we're going to do, and some access. They're going to give me some really smart people who are going to come in and educate people in the agency about future communications and stuff like that, and that is brilliant and fantastic. But I think those dialogues are really, really important. We ran an event in the agency about 3 weeks ago during the IPA Effectiveness Week. Lots of agencies were encouraged to run their own events. And we were lucky enough to get hold of Peter Field, who worked with Les Binet on the long and the shorts of it, and long-term versus short-term advertising effects. And it was fascinating. We had 40 or 50 people in the agency, some people in the agency, some clients in the agency. And it was really refreshing to see and have a discussion for 3 hours and different presentations talking about the long-term impact of communications and building brands over 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, in which things like context, in which things like safety in the right environment is just fundamentally important. And that's what sort of made me realize this imbalance of not spend, but of share of mind of planners, if you like. We spend so much time talking about the short term. And that means that you've got people who are growing up in the industry with half the knowledge of what they should be talking about. And I think it's really worrying. But I would also say we are all complicit in that. Most of my clients are also quite fixated on the short term because their shareholders are fixated. But it is definitely a problem. And I think that that plays into the challenge that you have in this marketplace, because if you've got shed loads of users, shed loads of data, you can, and some slightly murky practices around the visibility of all of that data, you can prove short-term return really, really quickly and really, really easily. If you've got to bring together 40 different separate siloed data infrastructures and try to somehow fit all that stuff together, Sainsbury's formula sometimes still makes an appearance, which is weird in this world. A lot of people have no idea what I'm talking about. That's okay. That's really hard. It was really hard to bring all that stuff together.
Yeah.
So I think it's a big challenge, and I think an industry that has, and brands that have fought each other largely for share of wallet, have allowed these big beasts to come in who in some cases almost weren't a competitor because they were on a different platform, they were doing something completely different. Now all of a sudden they are huge competitors, and I think working together, working in concert, I think would be powerful.
Yeah, I think that's the one of the things that's been occurring to us is that as we start to look at these different initiatives that are starting to come together, we need to build them in partnership. So yeah, if we're going to work in data, let's not just do something in isolation. Let's start to build something together so that we know it's working the right way. And also, we won't have the people that will be in your agency all day, every day. So how can we do this in a way that's most effective to make things happen? Thank you, Dan. Reece.
Yeah, well, I'd agree with that point. I think we speak to publishers obviously day in, day out, and I think it's certainly an issue on their side. I mean, we're coming to Q4 now, everyone's in the same boat, numbers, let's hit our numbers, and how are we going to do that? So I think that there is a difficulty in that sort of that long-term thinking. I think publishers are coming around to that sort of understanding that they need to build out that sort of that long-term thinking and actually understand that they're in control of their own data, they're in control of their own inventory, and I think there's certainly more of a switch from the conversations that we're having that publishers are having a bit more of that long-term thought, the long-term strategy. It's not happening now, tomorrow, but it's getting there. I think it's trying to find that balance of getting hammered by your CFO, so why we're not hitting the numbers, to actually thinking, well, we're trying to put sort of long-term plans in play for the next year, 18 months in what we're doing. We're trying to think of our data strategy. We're trying to think of how we're going to evolve the business to be aware of the challenges that's coming in the market. So I think there's definitely sort of a switch in that. I think there's a lot of the stuff that Guardian's doing I think is really interesting, focusing on the safety element of things, focusing on the content and everything else. I think they're doing some really cool stuff over there. And I think there's a few good alliances that have cropped up. DAX is a great example of that. You've got the One Excel Alliance, I think, which is done really well as well from a regional perspective. So I think there are publishers thinking that way. I think what's coming out of that as well is it feels that if they've got like a niche or a USP around that, then that's when they get a bit of success. DAX has certainly got a USP. They've grown that sort of audio audience, and they've become first to market really with a product around that. And I think from a One Excel perspective, that's a regional perspective on that. So we're going after local titles. I think that's sort of been quite successful as well. So I think if you can think long term, if you can think strategically around what your USP is, how you're actually going to go and leverage these data points and the sort of partnerships you've got, and actually go and have a difference in the market, you're actually adding something to the ecosystem, I think, and there's definite wins there to have.
Well, it's interesting, this point about longer and shorter term, right? Because actually one way to deal with that is to be closer to each other, to start to work out ways to deliver that. And I guess another part is to say, okay, let's if we feel like short-term objectives aren't in our favour, let's start to research what gets delivered from longer-term objectives. Let's start to look into the value of context, and that actually was part of the discussion that came up yesterday when we've done a UX piece. We're talking with, in fact, one of Dan's colleagues at Cara, Alison Ashworth. We also had the design team with Ian from the Telegraph. Talking about, okay, actually, we understand that there's a context to the content that we create. We also understand there's a context to the advertising. What's the emotional hooks that I have there in the understanding who that person is and how I can take them through to a defined business result, but that which could be along a spectrum of things that measures that you look at in terms of, okay, I moved their brand perception, and eventually it came through to purchase. So I think that's a really interesting development that you've highlighted there. So, Winnie, give us your perspective from the client side. Are we moving in the right direction? Are we thinking of the right things? Is it the kind of discussion that we could have together?
It's a tough question. I think I've been reflecting on what's discussed here today. Probably one of the odd voices on the floor, because I'm from the advertiser side, from brands versus in the industry. I come from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. It's a B2B company, and so for us, in B2B, for the CMO for marketing to have a seat at the table with sales, we cannot avoid a discussion around short term. It is just impossible, right? To be able to actually get the funding to invest in the first instance. However, since our split from HP Inc. 2 years ago, we are also on a journey to build a brand internationally. And so there's a possibility, I think, for marketing and the advertisers to separate long-term, short-term conversation internally. So for if we follow that kind of strategy, then it gives us more time. And in B2B, the buyer's journey is longer. I think for B2C, probably a little bit more challenging because often the dashboard is triggered by certain techniques that incentivize short-term behavior. However, in B2B, it's often we are still held accountable for what we are measured, which sometimes comes down to how quickly we can accelerate sales. So there is that appetite for longer-term brand building and awareness play. However, the measurement has always been difficult to ascertain the impact of the investment for longer term. Versus short term, you can measure lead generations and how that generated immediate marketing qualified leads, right? So it was very encouraging to see what you presented here, that potentially through the collaboration across different players, main players, quality players in the industry, to build a more scalable solutions for us to buy. And stronger attribution, that's very, very important. We rely very much on our agency partners. I think many of us, I work in the digital marketing industry for a long time, not just at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, but in high tech mainly for the last 10 years. Once upon a time, Carl was the main partner when I was at Nokia, overseeing the demise of the empire. But that aside, I think the agency plays a very, very important role. If you think about clients' behavior drives the agency behaviors, drives the industries, and certain symptoms of fake news, unsafe environment, the short term, and buying audience as cheap as possible to deliver the cheapest CPM, whatever, right? But then you can look at it from the other perspective as well. Clients really don't have that expertise as agencies do in the industry, even though sometimes the emphasis might fluctuate. But agencies tend to have an ability to align directly into the marketing leadership. And that's where the senior agency leadership can play an instrumental role to help the marketing leadership to actually articulate the importance of having a longer-term approach to managing the customer experience. So I think strategically, the audience-first strategy is pretty much down its miles, and now maybe the strategy should turn into, like what Richard was saying earlier, is audience first within context. And that is a powerful position to be in for agency to actually promote. If the marketing leadership can actually understand and be able to front up in front of a CFO and the sales to really fight for that long-term agenda, you will see that turn into a more fair contract with agencies, which turn into a more fair pricing with publishers, which drives just a healthier ecosystem overall. And the other thing I would like to also echo and support is the call for commitment. We are in business together, and when it comes down to ROI, sometimes some concept becomes a debate versus an action. So when publishers actually come together and the trade association come together to make a stance and say this is commitment we are going to make, even though it might have financial impact on us negatively, it suddenly makes the marketing people sit up and say, oh, maybe this is a serious issue, because otherwise we don't sometimes care. Right? Yeah. We sort of say, right, that is the industry's problem, and if the industry doesn't take a stance, why should we? So we will go for where the audience is as cheap as possible. But if there's such a movement being generated, then suddenly, it becomes an agenda for the executives.
Yeah.
So it's very good to see. Yeah.
Well, I think obviously it's nice that the market comes back to this way of thinking that context becomes important. It's something that the quality debate helps our members with, to start to get involved in that and to bring a focus back to that way of thinking. And so, but I also feel that there's a responsibility for publishers in the offer that they bring to a client to start to address both, not just to say, oh, we are this perfect long-term opportunity, less about the short term. There's benefits in both areas, isn't there? And I think that we're sympathetic, right, to the fact that you are under pressure to deliver that revenue. Therefore, it's the responsibility of publishers to to deliver a better product, which I hope it's clear there's lots of innovation going on there to start to deliver that. But I was going to ask Dora to try and sort of respond to some of that. Is that kind of thinking in the right direction? What are you doing at the Telegraph? What should we be doing in this space?
I think the short and long-term point is important for lots of layered reasons. The challenge that a lot of publishers have today is that we are stuck in this space between where this direct and programmatic tension, let's say. We all know that if we continue down the direct route, the budgets that we would receive from buyers would be bigger. The reason that they are smaller when it goes programmatic is due to the extensive supply that is in the programmatic ecosystem. There is so much supply that you can find a lot of cheap supply, and you get a dilution of the ad budgets that premium publishers would have had in a direct space. The issue for premium publishers is that we don't have the scale that you will find in the rest of the programmatic ecosystem. And we can't sell it cheap, and honestly, nor should we.
Yeah.
Because we need to change the conversation from inputs to outputs. We need to start thinking about the outcome, not how much it cost. Because, and I used to work at Yahoo, and one of my favorite Americans used to say to me, "Garbage in, garbage out." He had an American accent, but I couldn't do it. But you get the point, right? If you and Bethan said it earlier, you pay for what you get. But having said all that, of course, publishers understand. We understand what is happening in the marketplace, and so we have to come up with offers. We have to come up with reasons. We have to provide value. And we have to provide reasons for agencies to want to work with us and to tell our story when they're working with the brands. And it is the responsibility of publishers, absolutely. It's also the responsibility of agencies to educate their brands so that the brands can begin to care a lot more about the challenges that we have in the digital ecosystem. Again, that point of garbage in, garbage out, and let's look at the outcomes, not look at how much it cost. Because you could have had a great reach from lots of crappy inventory, but what's the long-term value of that traffic that you drove, and how much can you really attribute the total sales that you got to that versus a bunch of other things that the brand would have done. So those are sort of my initial reactions to some of the things that we have just been saying.
I mean, you could sort of possibly reframe the problem around measurement and the outcomes you talk about, because in the absence of a tangible business outcome, you will gravitate towards what can be measured. And the most absolute thing that can be measured is price. And the most absolute thing that you can hit someone with a stick with is price, which then springs up a whole other industry around it to audit that price. And price is super important, but to your point, I would gladly pay 3 times as much if I'm selling some stuff or if I'm building the brand better, because ultimately I'm getting a better, hopefully short, medium, and long-term return on investment. I would hypothesize that less than 20% of clients have any real idea of the spend they put in the market and the return that gives to their business.
I was going to ask that. Do you get a lot of pushback from the clients on that? So when they're coming in, and do you have to show your workings on that and the benefit of short term?
So some are there is a host. Some are brilliant, and we have very joined up understanding of how communications work, and we are a full partner. And I think you made the point. You started making the point about working at a high level with clients, because the challenge you face is you've got to justify what you're doing to a CFO who's speaking a completely different language to the language that we speak. So some clients we have a very grown-up, good relationship with in that space. Some clients have a pretty good understanding inside their business, and because of the policy of their business, they don't share that understanding with us, which, you're going into battle with one arm tied behind your back because I don't have the facts. And then they might use it as a stick occasionally. That's sort of whoosh. That plan's not very good because my machine says it's not very good. Another one's, I'm not 100% certain they want to know. Well, because if it proves that it's not working, then my budget could get lower, and then that's not a great place to be either. So I think there are,
as well, isn't it?
yeah, it's a big, it's a big challenge. But ultimately, our job isn't to spend our clients' money. Our job is to build their business and their brand. And I think you need to sort of flick around to that thinking, and then you start. But so much of that is unmeasured, and it's harder to measure, and it's easier to get an RFP and say, here's a grid, here's a grid, here's a grid, smallest number in the bottom corner is going to win this.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start engaging the conversation about price, you're having the wrong conversation.
Totally.
And we've sort of lost the magic.
So question to publishers then, if we change that dynamic, would you be willing to be paid on results? Paid on outcomes?
Sure, possibly yes, absolutely.
'Cause,
If we can measure it, and if we understand the economics of it well enough, we should absolutely have that conversation.
Because agencies, I think, are pushing, certainly in the sense I get, are pushing with their clients to try to get some sort of thing. But actually, if we were all in it together,
exactly,
that's a more interesting conversation. Because otherwise, you're just passing the stick.
Exactly.
To someone else.
The last thing that publishers need to do is further find ourselves on the back foot by agreeing to something that favours other parties and us last, ultimately.
But maybe before getting to that, how would you like to be paid point, we need to get to that point that says, okay, how do we start to understand outcomes of what drives them? Are we going to measure the right ones? And actually, this is a good question, right? What should be the first thing publishers should do to prove to media agencies and clients that they should expand their relationships with premium publishers? I would say what should be the first thing publishers should measure. How could you get to that point that says, okay, we need to start to be able to understand, and like in the data piece that we've done, we've said, okay, first thing you would do is move from looking at cookies to people. As soon as you can do that, you can start to do lots more. I'm not saying that's a simple thing to do, by the way, but as soon as you can do that, you start to have the opportunity to measure more things, understand more things that are outcomes. You're understanding the outcome for a person rather than for a cookie.
This is the right question. Sorry, I'm being very, very, very unpopular. But wouldn't that be the question to the client? Because the buyers, ultimately the brands, determine the metrics that matters. So is it the publisher determine that, or the agency determine that, or the responsible clients need to determine that? And it comes down to accountability as well. There's fragmentation, right, within the marketing department. Some people are more familiar with the industry, but then let's say people who are responsible for media and buying or procurement, right? So but it's very largely an efficiency play. So that conversation there, regardless what publisher major, is going to be cost efficiency because that's what they're measured on. And that's the accountability. Versus if you have marketeers who are the brand champions and typically sitting in the creative side of the business and creating content, even they don't execute media buy, they are the guardian of the brands and they have a different accountability and the measurement, right? So in a way that the whole purpose of lifting the conversation to the C-level, CMO level, at least the exact level, is that to connect the different interest parties within marketing at the client side to have a more comprehensive measurement framework. And that drives a lot of the conversation here. I mean, if it's about engagement, if it is about long-term relationship, about experience, that's a different kind of metric from efficiency. So you started to look at both effectiveness of your investments versus efficiency of your investment. Then, and I think that again is echoing what you were saying before, the brands and the client, the advertisers and the publishers and agencies working together to map this out. It's not just the publisher who is responsible in this alone, because whatever quality metrics that can be provided, if the advertiser side discarded, it can't really move very far, even with the agency support. But it comes down to having the champion and the brand at the advertiser side. And the advertiser side don't necessarily always have that kind of competency, hence coming back to the thought leadership by the industry and also by the agencies to
It goes
support
back to
us.
Dan's point, doesn't it? Even if you're going back and having to report back to different advertisers, if some of them don't care, some of them care a little bit, and some of them care a lot, what are the metrics of the ones that do care? They're trying to drive footfall, they're trying to drive brand awareness, so they're trying to create more online sales. Everything's going to be different. So I agree with your point. It has to be everyone working together. That the publishers have to have work with the agencies, have to work with the advertisers, and if there's a disconnect for what the goals are, what the metrics are, what they want on the back end of that, then how you expect there isn't going to be a one size fits all solution to that. There's going to be different ways of working for different advertisers, for different campaigns, for different metrics. So I think it's a difficult question to answer. It goes back to your point that if the advertisers don't always know what they want, then it's difficult to know for the publishers to know how they're going to please the advertisers and how they're going to achieve you guys as well. So,
I can't remember what the question was exactly.
I changed it a bit.
Sorry.
So
But it said
Gotcha.
it was something about the one thing you would do. So just really practically, don't try to boil the ocean. Yeah. So don't go to an agency. I'll speak from an agency perspective. Don't go to an agency. We want more of your money, because I have a lot of people who are saying that. Yeah, all the time. Pick off 5 clients, 5 teams in that agency that there's some sort of affinity with. Yeah, there is some sort of traction, maybe some previous stuff that's worked quite well, but find some areas that you can really focus on and give it timeline. So the way that I work, not with everyone in the marketplace, but with a select number of people in the marketplace, sort of with Cara, okay, is I say to media owner X, who are the brands of the 50, 60 or so brands, who are the brands that you think you have the best chance to do some great work with? I talk to my guys and say, this publisher, who do you think are, which brands? And we match up something, and then we pick 5 of them, and we let that roll for and we replace one every 2 months. Because if you're not getting any traction, then you may as well not bang your head against a brick wall. It's really simple. It's not particularly rocket sciencey, but it just sort of narrows the focus a little bit and say, we're going to be really proactive. We're going to give you a bit more time with us as well. We'll give you a little bit more space, a bit more high up the food chain, a bit more long-term strategic perspective. So you're not just getting an RFP and respond to it and get no feedback, which I hear a lot of, by the way. So we have to help that as well and give feedback. But I think don't boil the ocean. Focus on a couple of things and try to win with those.
Sorry, Dora, I sort of like hijacked your question.
I'm sorry?
Hijacked your question, because there was a question to you as well, the publisher side, in the previous question.
Yeah, and that certainly makes sense. What we're working on at the Telegraph is 3 things, big things. We're looking at our editorial strategy, and we're thinking about the way that we can focus. And we see areas in which we can really double down and create value for our consumers, which in turn creates value for our buyers, for our brands. So we're looking at different areas. We're looking at developing in sport, which obviously we already do, news and politics, which we already do, luxury lifestyle, financial services, travel, and then a new one for us, which is the business of tech. Where we really see there's a gap there that we feel that we could fill with the Telegraph voice and a very British perspective on the business of technology, whether that is in Silicon Valley, whether that's in London or Berlin, whether that's in Israel. And so we're really looking at how we develop that content because we feel like it's something that our consumers will really respond to. The second part of what we're doing is on data. And the data that we have on our consumers. We've started focusing all of our, or not all, but many of our efforts on registering our user base, on our customer base. beginning to build up a picture, a profile of who our customers are. There are lots of different ways that our consumers can register with the Telegraph, whether that could be on our fantasy football app, or whether that's registering to read a free premium article a week, or whatever it may be. And we're going after 10 million registered users. It's a multi-year strategy, but we're going after 10 million. It's going to be something that we really see long term. Registration equals engagement. Engagement means people are coming back. People are coming back because they're interested in the content, which gives us more and more opportunities to work with our brands to create experience, to create mutually beneficial experiences. And then the third one is on the advertising side. So it all sort of follows through really from the consumer to the data to the brands, where we can start to reimagine what advertising could be on the Telegraph and beyond, with other partnerships that we might do, and start to try and get smarter and work really in collaboration and in partnership with our customers. And I think that goes back, Dilip, to sort of your suggestion, which is what can publishers do, and data is one thing, media alliances is another thing, but which I don't think you said, always put the consumer first.
Well, I definitely agree with you. I didn't say it. Yeah, so I think that that's the thing that we've seen in a lot of the discussions that we've had, especially around the data piece. Data tends to be thought of as it becomes technical, it becomes something that's about the technology and something about the numbers. But in the end, what you're trying to do is to understand who that human being is that you're already communicating with as a publisher and having a relationship with them. That's also relevant to the advertiser, and how can you make that connection work in the best possible way. Dan, are we headed in the right direction? Are we going to having meetings next week about this?
Of course. So, I mean, the data question is an interesting one. Because, as much as you are an association of online publishers, you are Telegraph, and you are all different with your own data infrastructure.
Sure.
And as I've said, often talking to people, I'm interested in your stack, but I'm interested in the market stack. That's kind of what I'm interested in, because I have to represent the widest possible start point for my client. And then there's a balance between, if I'm really bringing the right data to bear, I should be able to find pretty easily the people I want to speak to. Now, I can probably find the people I want to speak to from a fairly short-term perspective relatively easily, because I can profile them, find people who look like them, and then find those people out there across a whole host of different environments. I can also find out about what behaviors they're exhibiting, which may tell me that there are the type of mode they're in. Are they in a buying mode? And that can be product agnostic, yeah. So depending on the chemical makeup of your brain, you might be in more of a purchase mode than not. And some of the behaviors that we can track online can tell you whether you're in that mode or not in that mode. So it's a perfect time to serve a message to you. Context is also clearly part of that. That also drives that behavior to a certain degree as well. So the question I have to ask myself, and the balance I have to sort of strike, is that I want to be able to access those people, and I'm just going to put myself in a relatively short-term space for the time being, because if I'm thinking long-term, it's slightly harder to work out how I build my profile in the first place, because I can't build it on short-term behaviors. Yeah, a bunch of people who just bought. If I'm trying to warm someone up 3 years ago, those are not the right two things to be looking at. Should I be going after the right context, direct to a publisher, with potentially some inherent levels of wastage that's going to go along with that, because I'm going to be buying inventory, and not all that inventory will be exactly the profile that I'm looking for necessarily. And certainly, if I want to apply all those filters to it, my cost will increase and my volume will very sharply decrease. So I have to go hugely wide. I've got to go to all those trillions of websites to be able to get the volume that I need of that audience. And that, that is a genuine balance that my planners are making. And then I've also got the fact that at the same time, my remuneration is probably 5% less than what it was last year because I've had to do a contract renegotiation to avoid going to an open market pitch. So I have to do that more efficiently as well so I can maintain my margin and my revenue growth because everyone has to grow. Yeah, that's a fact.
Unquestionable.
Yeah, just deal with it. So I have to automate. So I don't want to do too many direct buys because it's not as efficient. I want to automate this and do it really fast so that I can protect my margin. So I don't really have a particular point other than to say it's really difficult because that's what I and my business is facing.
Yeah.
Is I have to be able to do that.
Absolutely,
So
yeah.
I guess how can you, knowing that context, how can you feed your data in so that you're a part of that puzzle?
Yeah.
Can grab as much of it as you possibly can, but not say, no, you must deal with me directly, because I don't want to do that. Not because I don't like you or like your brand, but because of the other dynamics of my business that are driving me to behave in a certain way. Does that make sense, or am I just talking absolute shit?
It definitely
Could be both.
makes sense. It does make sense, and it's interesting because I've spent most of my career talking about data over context, saying,
Yeah.
so it doesn't matter the context, it's all about now I'm at the Telegraph. It's definitely all about the context.
You're drinking the Kool-Aid, don't you?
No, I absolutely understand your question, and I think there's a couple of things. I think that publishers need to start to think about their data much more than we have in the past, because we've relied on our context. And we've relied on that very premium environment, which is still today, but we didn't many years ago bank on what would come with the programmatic drive. But your point around, in the end, you're talking about efficiency, right?
To a degree.
You're talking
Efficiency both of the actual physical act of trading and managing a campaign, but also efficiency of only reaching the people that I want to reach, who have exhibited behaviors that match very closely people who have previously purchased from me within a window that's relevant to my brand. And this is why I'm sort of catching this in the short term, because there is also huge value, before anyone comes up and garrots me, in wastage, hitting people out of market. There is value in that. I'd also quite like to control that too, with data against different levers, most of which I haven't figured out yet because we've only been doing this for a couple of years. But yeah, it is sort of efficiency.
Yeah, and in the context of GDPR, it also becomes...
It's going to get pretty interesting.
Yes.
I'm waiting for the big suing. We'll have a better idea of what's going on after the first big suing, I think.
That's a terrifying thought.
I know. I'm just hoping none of us are involved anyway. There is appetite. I think there is appetite to have that conversation. There's a recognition by publishers, by us, but we recognise that our data, as we go forward, is going to become important. Obviously, I have to caveat that within the context of GDPR and the consent, et cetera. But there's definitely ways, absolutely ways. The technology exists already to start to match publishers' data with brands' data. There's good examples where that has happened in the past. We've got to make sure that both where GDPR are compliant, but also that we have the scale to make it worthwhile. And I think that comes back to the point that we are very much aware of and that we are designing our strategy around as we go into 2018 to ensure that we can meet some of those requirements, some of those requests. Would it be possible to do it across we're probably in the very GDPR non-compliant space here, but would it be able to do it across publishers? Because then you get scale. Yeah. So one of the challenges you've got is you've got Association of Online Publishers, you've got 40, 60, whatever it might be, but your total volume of scale only approaches some of the big platforms when you have everyone together.
Yeah.
But you don't have everyone together. You have 40 individual silos.
Yeah.
But within that, you've got 40 different CRM systems, you've got 40 different DMP systems, you've got 40 sets of first-party data,
Yeah.
some got location data, some haven't got location data, some are more mobile, some are more desktop. So there's intrinsic challenges just in that, first of all, before you even start.
AI? That'll sort it all out, yeah?
There are the, yeah.
Done.
And
You fixed it.
There are so many.
Yeah, you're right.
I get many. At the moment, there are businesses popping up, trying to make a quick buck on the back of GDPR. I'm sure there'll be a business soon that will solve some of that, or at least claim to solve some of that problem. But in the end, it's about having an ID, a customer ID, that we can track from brand through to various publishers. I've made that sound
Super easy.
far simpler than it probably is.
Super easy. We're going to talk about business after this.
Yeah, but yes, it's an
Just
interesting concept.
It did come up in the data discussion yesterday. I mean, companies like LiveRamp are doing onboarding, building a pool. They're working with AppNexus. I'm not saying that's the solution that you need to employ, but it's becoming easier with technology to do that. And AOP would like to encourage more partnerships between publishers to approach that scale that you're talking about. Obviously, there are ways to make that happen. We're working on it. It's looking very promising. Then the part that comes out of that is, okay, well, if we've got this ability to generate that scale, and how do we work together, for what goals, what clients, can we do this in partnership? And kind of bringing it back to that opportunity. I think that there's, I'm sorry, just on the point of GDPR, we're working on that, and actually there's nobody in more control of how data will be shared, well, apart from now, actually, the person that is providing their data. But publishers are the first line of connection to those people. And for the ecosystem to continue to work, data will need to be shared. So data can be shared between publishers, it can be shared between platforms, but it just has to be done the right way. There's going to be complexity, there's going to be more risk, and that's why we've got the...
So an interesting maybe case study, maybe not, is Oath. That's about 40 brands that are all of a sudden now one. You've worked with some of them in the past. I think it's a good thing because it's putting another volume player in the marketplace. That's a good thing. But I assume they are going through similar machinations that you're going through, because they have 40 siloed brands.
That's right.
All with different infrastructures, all with different technologies that they are trying to put together as one proposition and selling it to me.
That's right.
It just might, I don't know, it might be an interesting conversation to have. It might be I don't know, maybe you're chatting more.
I mean, actually, along the way, we've been talking to lots of publisher collectives, overseas, here in the UK, to learn from it, to figure out what it is we can do together. I think that in each of those cases, you get to this point, which was kind of what you were saying before, like, don't try to solve every problem at once. In fact, when you look at the complexity of all the problems that need to be solved, impossible, right? So where would you focus? You could start to focus in a certain vertical, so that in the data pieces that we looked at, we've seen that what you can learn from Facebook and Google, what they've done very well is they just took vertical one by one. It says, okay, now we've got auto, now we've got tech, and I actually, it was interesting that you were working with Nokia. At the time I was working with Nokia, Google turned up with all this information about mobile phones. They know the market inside out, and they've built that, and they've focused in each of those places, and they've built a stronger relationship with clients. I think there's a great opportunity to work that way, and then you can start to say, okay, within that vertical I can start to look at shorter and long-term objectives. How can I put them together? You just begin to solve these things, but the way that I think that works best is together, rather than sort of like, we've done our research, now let's show it to you, what do you think? Is this right? I think we need to build those things together. Yeah. And I think that's what I'm hearing and learning from the points that you're making. So we didn't have much time for this panel. I just want to ask you all for one last comment and suggestion of what we need to think about and do. And then, before we go, I want to, because we have to leave this hallowed building, but we have got some space at a bar around the corner, Rich, is that correct?
I don't know that we've booked space, but if there's enough of us,
We want you to come there with us, that's what we're saying. Rich has got his credit card, let's not beat that around too loudly, there's only, 150 people in the room, isn't there, Rich? But yes, before we go, I'd just like to hear you sort of like, last thought. What can the AOP do? What do you want to see happen? What should we be doing? I know it's about 5 questions, but you don't have to answer them all. Just one thought. Winnie.
No, sorry from me. I want to support Dora on the call for not to focus the conversation too much on efficiency. I think the last 20 minutes or so we're talking about like scalability and the standardization and all that. My role is EMEA, so from a regional perspective, have got very keen interest to have a standardized operation and then to be able to buy at scale in efficiency. But on the other hand, look at the Telegraph and other premium publishers in market as to provide us the debt that help us to penetrate the local ecosystem. And that is not something that efficiency play can give to us. So I think, outside of this standardization package kind of conversation, there's also from advertisers' perspective, the appetite for quality, in-depth engagement with the users.
Yeah, so let's really get down to the thing that makes an impact on your business, understand it better and deliver it better. Reece.
Yeah, similar. I would say it has to have that hook. I think in principle it's a good idea. We've seen examples, it's worked in the markets and in this market. And I think the idea of a consortium of premium publishers at scale is great, but what's that extra hook? What's that extra magic sauce that's going to make the publishers want to invest time, resource and money into making it work, and what's going to make the advertisers and the agencies want to come and commit and take the spend that they're going to put into the other big players into this? I think in principle it's a good idea. We're seeing more and more of this happening, but what's the hook? What's the magic sauce that's going to make this stand out as opposed to its scale, its premium? There's got to be something else that's going to make everyone want to really, really sort of put time and resource and investment into this.
And I think it's the point that Winnie made there. You have to focus on what the client needs and how you deliver it, and not trying to solve all the problems at once.
Yeah.
Dan?
So I would say the best work we currently do with publishers is in the partnership space, which might be one of many possible answers to the question you're asking, where we go really deep, cross-platform. Done a lot actually with you guys, and the client is clearly at the heart of that, because if you're going to form a decent partnership, you've got to get everyone involved in that, and use all the different platforms to wrap a consumer real people experience for people to, and I do genuinely believe that publishers probably do that better than anyone, because you've been doing it for a long time. You just have actually more power to do it, more platforms to do it across than you've ever had before. So I think that's a potentially powerful way of that magic sauce, or that extra connection.
Excellent. I've written that down. Dora.
I guess it's the measurement piece. It's that whole garbage in, garbage out point. We need to keep having those conversations and make sure that we're changing the conversation away from price to outcomes.
Yeah.